I stepped into my 20s with cancer. I'd never thought something like this would happen to me. I've never drank alcohol, smoked, tried drugs, or anything like this. I worked out 3 times a week, quite healthy, yeah? But let's move forward as it was. When I was 19, I sometimes started to feel discomfort in my back. Over time, it became a nagging pain. From time to time, the pain stopped, or I might take a bath and it was gone for a while. In January or February of 2014, I went to a camp from my university to help build one of the buildings. One day, we played basketball for 2 hours after work, and I was really exhausted, but something was definitely wrong. I continued to sweat for a couple of hours and suddenly remembered that I started to sweat during nights and a lot more during days. My back pain was getting worse. I took a painkiller and it didn't help. I took another one, didn't help. I was sent home a day or two later and I don't remember the details. I had a CT scan and found out I had a 6 centimeter tumor. Interestingly, my blood tests were very good, and one oncologist from my hometown said I would fly into space with such tests. When I found out about the tumor, I had to move back to my parents' place. My parents are religious in their own unique way. I don't believe in God, and especially in religion in my native country. Religion there is just something that has nothing to do with faith. I respect everyone with their choices, and I expect the same behavior in response. Whatever or whoever you believe in, it's your life, it's your choice, your beliefs, and I respect that. But my parents are the opposite, at least in regards to me. Imagine the situation from my perspective. My treatment hasn't started yet. I felt terribly ill and extremely weak. My parents invited over a priest and 2 women, maybe nuns. I'm not sure who they were. They came to pray for my health and consecrate the apartment. But I was already feeling unwell and just wanted to lie down or at most sit. However, I was required to stand while they recite prayers, and it felt like it lasted for at least 30 minutes. They forced me to kiss the cross, drink some liquid, and wear a small cross necklace while I was sick. At that moment, I didn't even have the strength to argue or resist. I simply didn't have any physical energy left. My parents claimed they were doing all of this for my sake, but in reality, it was for their own benefit, and I was the one suffering throughout it all. I've never worn any kind of jewelry on my body in my entire life because I didn't like it, but I had to wear that cross necklace throughout my illness for them to evade arguing. Of course, I took it off as soon as my treatment ceased and I got better. I don't like it when I'm deprived of choice. It was in my 3rd year of university, and at 20 I was diagnosed with Hodgkin lymphoma. It's inoperable because connected with lymphatic system and blood. I had a more than 6 centimeter tumor which had grown into my left lung. I had back pain for approximately a year, but thought it was something connected with my gym routine. I didn't know the diagnosis at first, and my first pre-diagnosis was lung cancer. I found out this fact when I walked in the medical ward before biopsy surgery in the thoracic surgery department. For a person who hasn't touched a single cigarette in his life, it was devastating, but I didn't lose hope. I was surprised by the patients there. Some had their lung removed, others underwent various surgeries, and some had tubes attached to drain fluids. Can you guess how many people smoked? Everyone. Absolutely everyone. And since the balcony there was closed, they would squeeze out through a narrow window to smoke. I was the only one who didn't. After the biopsy surgery, I had 2 tubes in my left side to drain liquids, and somehow I didn't really know what exactly caused the severe pain. Probably these 2 tubes pressed on the tumor, but my back pain increased hundreds of times. I couldn't walk, I barely breathed. I even couldn't eat by myself. Most of the time, I tried not to move to avoid the additional pain. I remember the next day after the surgery, some nurse came to me and said, "You have to go to the ground floor." And we were on the second probably, to have a CT scan. And when I politely asked her to wheel me there because of the above reasons, she screamed at me and forced me to walk. I had no one at that exact time to help me, and I had to obey. I got up, slowly left the room, and a couple of steps after collapsed on the floor. It was unbearable. Tears rolled down my cheeks permanently. I couldn't control them, even though I tried. Somehow crawled to the bench near the room and tried to endure the pain, but I couldn't. That nurse came to me some time after and screamed at me again, but I was in shock because of the pain and still couldn't move. I can't say how much time passed, and some doctor noticed me crying and helped me, wheeled me down to the procedure and back. What was wrong with that nurse? Unforgettable feelings number one. At the time I had to have my tubes removed, I thought it would be with some kind of anesthesia. Poor me. How naive I was. I'd been saying to the doctor a lot of times I couldn't take this pain, but what he did that day, I also can't forget. He splashed some water on my side and abruptly pulled the tubes out of me, one by one. I don't remember anything after, just the feeling of severe pain. I was terribly shaking for hours. My heart was pounding like crazy. Unforgettable feelings number two. When the result of the biopsy came, I was moved to hematology department. Everyone there was nice and helpful. It was a relief. Chemotherapy. By the time I started receiving treatment, the tumor had grown over 8 centimeters, and numerous smaller ones emerged in just a few months. I remember a little relief from my back pain near the end of the first course, but it was replaced by the effects of chemo. I still clearly see the picture of red chemo flowing into my veins. I felt the worst after it. The red one was one of the many, but probably the worst one. I couldn't tolerate the red color for about 4 or 5 years after the chemo. Now I think it's gone and no longer evokes the same associations. Somewhere between the first and the second chemo, I already thought the back pain had gone, and suddenly it returned like before. I felt like an addict craving the next dose, except it wasn't drugs, but chemo. I wanted the pain to be gone. I couldn't sleep again. For the person who never drinks, smokes, uses, the craving was frightening. I lived the week before the second chemo with only this desire. It's like cancer only for your thoughts. Unforgettable feelings number three. Fortunately, I never felt such pain again after the second chemo. I celebrated my 21st birthday in the hospital battling cancer. I didn't know if I would celebrate another one, but I believed in it, despite the fact that deaths were everywhere around me. It was hard to see death around and think maybe you're next. I tried not to think about that. I always believed that I would live. Everything changes when you face death. It quickly shatters many perceptions of life. There were patients who were taken to the intensive care unit, but that's where they would pass away. If someone was taken there, there was no chance of survival for them. Everyone knew that person would die. Sometimes he spoke with the person, the next week they're gone. Once, between my chemos, I met a person who was also treated in the same hospital as me. We exchanged a couple of phrases. He looked good, was optimistic, told me he'd beat cancer, and everything was quite good. Blood tests, CT, some other results, and a month later, I found out he was dead. Unforgettable feelings number four. After all the chemos, I had to have PET CT to be sure I didn't have any active cancer cells, and flew to Istanbul because I had to wait for at least 2 months to do it in Russia. I couldn't wait. My doctor had to know what our next steps were, and so did I. Everything was good on the scan, and I was sure I was in remission. I still am. But I remember that week in Istanbul clearly, because the only way I could communicate with people is by using English. But it was like in the joke. You know Tom and Jerry? Yes, Jerry is here. I didn't speak English at all. That situation gave me the desire to speak freely in English, and many years later I reached it. My last chemo was 9 years ago. I beat cancer. There were many consequences for my health after that. I constantly felt short of breath, yawning, but unable to take a deep breath. However, all the tests and analysis for my lungs came back normal. The doctors couldn't do anything. It took about 5 years for these symptoms to mostly disappear. I lost approximately 20 kilo during chemo and weighed 70. At my normal weight, I was nearly 90 kilo. At the time, I worked out consistently and hard 3 times a week. And after that, in a couple of months, gained 30. And many more. I remember the first time when I went to supermarket to buy milk. I bought 1 liter and it was the heaviest milk I'd ever carried. 1 minute walk and I was exhausted. But the most important thing was I beat cancer. I did it. You can't deny the fact that you change when you face death. You are not the same. I think the cancer experience kind of formed me, made me stronger, changed the way I see life. It was a bit hard to talk about it, but I've told you practically everything I remember. There were a lot of other little details, feelings, and situations, but they're not so important. The most important thing is that I have never lost the desire to live.